Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 4.8, Events in the Korean War. It includes information that aligns on the second section of your Unit 4 study guide. Remember, you have control over the lecture, so pause when you need to, use your study guide to help you figure out what's important, write down your questions you have, rewatch if you need. You can always rewind, all kinds of stuff. So make sure you're doing that, and let's go ahead and get started. You should now have an idea of how the Korean War started and who was on each side. So today I really want to tell you about some of the turning points and big events in the war. Just to review the two sides. First, the North Koreans were backed by China and the Soviet Union. Not with military support, but supplied with weapons, training, and money, so that they weren't sending troops, China and the Soviet Union. The South Koreans were backed by the U.S. and the UN, at first with supplies, but that changed quickly and the UN began to send troops. So in June of 1950, the North Korean army, led by Kim Il-sung, who is the grandfather of the current leader of North Korea, invaded South Korea in a surprise attack. They were able to push towards the city of Pusan, where the South Koreans set up the Pusan perimeter and tried to hold off the invaders. And here you can see the Pusan perimeter down here in blue. So the North Koreans invaded, pushed down here around Pusan, they set up the perimeter, and were trying to hold them off. Holding off the invaders was doubly difficult because many South Koreans actually wanted Korea to be united into one country. So while they didn't necessarily want the Northern Communist government, they did want to be one Korea, an independent, united Korea. So when the U.S. realized that South Korea was nearly ready to fall to communism, they and the United Nations planned an attack to help save South Korea. This is containment, remember? In September of 1950, the UN, United Nations forces, landed at Incheon and cut off the North Korean invaders. So Incheon is this little place up here, if you can see kind of where I'm marking there. So they cut off the invaders that were further south. They were then able to push them out of South Korea. Instead of stopping at the 38th parallel, where the divide had been previously, the UN forces, under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, who you should remember from both World War II and the fact that he was in charge of Japan for the US for a long time, and Dwight Eisenhower, continued to push the North Koreans north. The UN forces were trying to reunite Korea under democratic rule. As the UN forces, led by U.S. generals, pushed north, they approached the Yalu River, which is the boundary between North Korea and China. So you can see up here the Yalu River, and on this map as well. They then sent troops to push the troops. China felt threatened, as the UN forces pushed past the Yalu River. So as they got closer, China felt threatened by this, and you can probably guess why. So they sent troops south to push the UN troops away from their border. The Chinese troops, that's what the second map here is. The Chinese troops aided the North Koreans in pushing the UN forces and South Koreans near the 38th parallel. Here, fierce fighting continued for nearly 3 years. There was little ground actually gained on either side. They stayed roughly around the 38th parallel. During the time, though, General MacArthur asked President Truman to expand the war into China, to blockade Chinese ports, and to actually use an atomic bomb, or more than one, on Chinese cities. He felt we could win that way. Truman refused, which prompted MacArthur to publicly criticize the president, who ultimately is his boss. He's the commander-in-chief. So in response, Truman had to do something to maintain control over the military. So he actually fired MacArthur for insubordination, which means he didn't do what he was asked to do. The war continued in Korea under new leadership, and this kind of was a big scandal, political scandal within the U.S. at the time. In July of 1953, both sides finally agreed on an armistice. What that means is they agreed to stop fighting. Neither one surrendered, so neither one won or lost. They just stopped. They set a new boundary that was very close to the 38th parallel, and that was called the Armistice Line. Today, that boundary still exists, and it's the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, between North and South Korea. Since the Korean War never officially ended, it just was a ceasefire agreed to by both sides, this area still exudes tension unlike any other area of the world. But that's not the only result of the war, and on our next two sets of notes, we'll look at the results of the Korean War. So this is the end of Notes 4.8. If you have any questions, make sure you bring those to class. I'll see you then.